Smoke signals from around the campfire.
Thank you so much, Pete, for coming to this wonderful interview here this afternoon on a very, I don't know, the sun is going down behind the mountains here. I don't know what it's like on your end.
I've got a lot of sheep crowding around my camper van, and for the first time in feels like 2 days, I've seen some blue sky. Although it's going to be dark soon, so I'm just enjoying the wonderful scenario of the winter bare trees and sheep peering in at my camper van window.
Oh, lovely. Sounds idyllic. Idyllic. So I'm here in Paros, and we kind of came up with an idea of interviewing you. And asking you really about the whole process of Light the Beacon and the campfire site. I think it's a fabulous idea to speak about, you know, where it all started. And I thought, you know, I'd ask you a couple of questions today, just for the viewers out there who are inquisitive about knowing a little bit more about you and where it all started. Where did it all start?
That's one of my favorite questions to open an interview as well. It leaves a lot of options open. So it all started in a town called Leamington Spa, which is right bang in the middle of England. Even has the tree that marks the centre of England, although that's under dispute from Meriden near Birmingham. Was brought up with my mum and dad in a semi-detached house. I guess we might have been called lower middle class. They met in the office of the local factory doing clerical work, and my gran lived opposite, so it was in Whitnash, which was on the unfashionable side of Leamington Spa, which was known as a sort of inland holiday resort. We had the spa waters, and we had some wonderful Regency housing in the middle, and you know, the usual stuff on the outskirts. It was Somebody told me it was the most violent town in Britain for its size. And yeah, I would echo that. It had its moments of trouble, but yeah, it was an interesting place to grow up.
Very interesting. And so did you go to school in the area?
Yeah, my parents weren't well off. My dad was a jobbing musician, so he'd started in the Second World War in Reykjavik when he was with the RAF. He was almost a conscientious objector, but he didn't quite manage that. But he formed a band of his own in Reykjavik and carried on in Leamington. They ended up doing the Saturday night dances at the town hall every week. So music was always central in my life, but they sent me to a prep school, and my sister, who was 6 years younger than me.
Oh, wow.
And I could never quite work out why, really, because they didn't have a lot of spare cash. Some summers we wouldn't be able to afford to go on a holiday. So nearly all the spare cash was channeled into us for education, for better or worse, you know, and I could write a book about my experiences at prep school, and I'm still processing a lot of that now. But it was, I suppose, a fairly humble upbringing, a very community-based set up in Whitnash. Only lived there until I was 5. Then we moved to a slightly more, well, not really salubrious, but slightly upmarket end of town, where we had a house that wasn't semi-detached, and I had loads of fields to play in. So those fields had quite an impact on my life. We were right on the edge of town, and there was quite a lot of gang warfare in the fields, but there was also a lot of really creative and constructive stuff, like building rafts and building dens in the hedgerows and just being in nature. It was a wonderful place to grow up in many ways.
At that age, did you envision anything like about what you wanted to do with your future? What were your plans at that age? I mean, how old were you then?
So I'd have been 6 or 7 when we moved to that end of town, and I was a dreamer, I suppose, in those days. At school, I was often reprimanded for gazing out of the window and losing attention during lessons. And I suppose I didn't suffer fools gladly at that age. You know, I knew which teachers were worthwhile and which ones I didn't really want to bother with.
Hmm.
So I had my favourite subjects, which tended to be the arts subjects. And I was, as I say, a little bit of a dreamer. So I'd be imagining the stuff we'd be doing with our dens and our gang
Yeah.
rather than concentrating on a boring geography lesson. And as a result, I tended to be nearer the bottom of the class. I started off at the other end, and then suddenly I was labelled lazy, which was a really interesting tag by one teacher who was determined to label everyone. And all my friends turned around when he said, Lawrence is lazy, and they said, he's not lazy. I think I just had my attention elsewhere, but it's not a label I would have gladly accepted because I don't think I was lazy. I was always dreaming up a few schemes, even if it was to do with building rafts on the pond or building a go-kart. Or at the age of 12, with my friend Martin, we had an idea for a pirate radio station. So we
Oh,
saved
wow.
saved up our pocket money and bought an ex-army transmitter after about a year of saving our pocket money every week, but it didn't work. So we were thwarted in an effort to get a radio station online.
Why didn't it work, the pirate station?
There was something to do with the transmitter that just wouldn't transmit. And
Oh,
Martin was a bit of a boffin for a 14-year-old, but he still, soldering iron in arm, he still couldn't work out how to get on air. Um, But we used to pretend instead we'd have schedules and we'd have loads of recordings on a reel-to-reel tape recorder. But we'd do an hour of presenting. You know, here's the next track by the Beatles. Rewind on the reel-to-reel for about a minute. And you get the sound of this fast rewinding, and then click in with the play. And I just fell in love with the pirates, the offshore pirates, Radio Caroline and Radio London. It was a new world to me, and at the time, the BBC was hardly putting out any pop music at all. I think they had 2 or 3 hours a day at most. So you got non-stop pop music on Caroline and London from the North Sea until they were outlawed by the Labour government under Tony Benn was telecommunications postmaster at the time, and he was the architect of the Marine Offences Act, which outlawed the pirates.
gosh, how
So,
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. And so we're talking, so 14, that was around the time that you wanted to do the pirate station. And as you grew up, you ended up traveling quite a bit and also DJing all around England, was it? Or was it all around Europe or just England?
Well, ultimately, when the Big Chill, which was the festival I started in the 90s, when that was in full swing, I DJ'd all over the world. So it started as an invitation from a venue in Harlesden, North London, the Mean Fiddler, quite a legendary venue. Um, I approached him, actually, the guy who owned it, and said, could I come and DJ? And he said, yep, pick and choose whichever night you want to come. So he was very trusting, paid me 25 quid a night, and I could pick and choose who I DJ'd for. So I remember doing a whole week of the Pogues and Robert Cray and all sorts of Los Lobos, some bands that were really happening on the sort of roots scene at the time. And I love just being able to play music to people because it's always been a passion for me.
Yeah, that's interesting that it's a passion for you to play music for people. It's like entertaining incredible melodies to the public. It's something that's in your blood, I think. And that's what you did when you traveled all over. So you did all these gigs everywhere, and then you ultimately ended up finding a place on an island called Paros. How did that come about?
Well, that was a result of the Big Chill going to Naxos and doing 3 parties there. So in the UK, we were doing a festival which started as a Sunday chill out club for 150 people in the back room of a venue in North London. No business plan, no spreadsheet, just bringing friends together. And that spread by word of mouth to, well, 30,000 at our peak. We were one of the top festivals in Britain size-wise, and hopefully still with some integrity at that point.
Yeah, true.
I did leave it before it finished, due to it losing its integrity, and every boardroom meeting was a bit of a battle over commercialism versus ethos, I guess would be a good way of describing it. But it gave me a ticket to playing all over the world, and we did some big chill festivals in Australia, New Zealand, all over Europe, Cairo, which was thrilling,
Wow.
played in Japan as well. So it was fantastic to have that opportunity to travel, and I was very humbled by that.
Why do festivals lose their integrity, do you feel?
Commercialism, really. There's always pressure to make it bigger, whether it's because of pressure from health and safety side or just commercial pressures because the capacity goes up, so you have to sell more tickets to cover the extra expenses, or
Mhm.
just greed, or a combination of all those things, really. And
I
it's
think,
very, very hard when you're putting on festivals to be able to interpret, how much demand there will be the following year. We did 5 brilliant years at Lammetry Gardens when the big chill started, or soon after it started. There's quite a history there, which will all be in the book when that comes out. But in the last of those 5 years, we had 1,000 people jump the fence because they couldn't get tickets. So, you know,
wow. What
that
does
caused
that
a whole.
says then? That says then that these festivals somehow need to be free. Right.
Well, it's impossible because the expenses are so high, but you couldn't make festivals free unless you offered nothing. And that would be a big health and safety risk. So inevitably, it will become a commercial venture. But there are all sorts of issues with judging the size of a festival and how it might grow or contract or expand. And yeah, it's difficult to gauge how it's going to go the following year. But the thing for the big chill with me, and we ended up in Naxos. That event alone, I think, brought about 10 marriages that I know of over 3 years, and I know
Really?
I know of about
Wow.
50 that came out of the big chill in a general sense, mainly from our Eastnell Castle event in the Malvern Hills in England. So that for me was, that was a result actually being able to change people's lives in a positive way and give meaning to their lives or resonance to their lives. So it feels great when people still come up to me 2 decades later and say, I still have a place for the big chill in my heart. It was much more than just a festival. It was
Yeah.
a life in many ways. We had a very early example of social networking, even before Facebook came along and took off, which was a simple forum. But out of that forum, there are a lot of enduring friendships and projects, collaborations, all sorts of other chat as well, and a lot of wibble too.
Yeah. I'm quite interested in thinking back to the ancient times, what festivals really were like back then, and how did people go about them? Did people barter with each other at festivals where everybody, brought something into the community or into the festival without there being a money issue, and everybody taking part in a specific role at the festival? That's personally how I see festivals, growing into the new era of our earth, not where money needs to be an issue, but where people come together really truly from their hearts and want to contribute, whether it's performance, whether it's making food, whether it's washing up, whether it's doing the artistry for the festival. There is a role for everyone. How do you feel about that?
I feel very strongly that the old model is all about audience and performer and people being entertained, and the new model is about everyone building an event together. But
Mm-hmm.
having said that, you still need someone who's prepared to underwrite the quite large costs of hiring the venue and bringing in tents or bringing in infrastructure or electricity or whatever needs to come in. So inevitably, it ends up with people. I mean, we've been lucky that we've had so many people in the campfire community who've been happy to come and volunteer to work at the event, but also to pay for a ticket, and similarly with performers, we don't really have, they're a performer so that they'll get paid. We can't afford to pay performers. We don't have an artistic budget. So people bring their gifts and their skills and whatever they want to bring to the event and contribute in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And many of those people also are happy to pay, which is amazing. So it's like a bunch of us just hiring a barn and going there, but on a slightly bigger scale, where we're sharing the cost and sharing the input. But ultimately, you do need someone at the helm who can underwrite it and just guide it in a whatever sense, really, whether that's logistically or spiritually or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and what are your thoughts about like a donation box at these enormous events where there isn't like a set price of what it is, but everybody can donate freely to how much they feel in their hearts that this whole experience is worth? What are your feelings about that?
Um, well, the actual physical donation box has never really worked, as we've seen at the Paros events. We ended up with nothing in it when we had a donation box put out. So I think the only way is just to either have a set price or to have a flexible price. And we do have a flexible price with Campfire,
Yeah.
um, but we still don't have the perfect model, and that's still very much work in progress, really.
Yeah, it's growing. It's growing. The perfect model comes. I mean, you've had so much experience, Pete, in these festivals, and you've seen so many different characters, and you know so many different roles that you've played within building this whole experience that you understand it's not easy. It's a very difficult task, but at the same time, it must be quite difficult for you because you need to act in all the roles to create this festival. Do you sometimes feel that it's too much, that you need to separate the roles to other people, or are you quite okay doing it on your own?
I wouldn't say I ever do it on my own, and that would be impossible. So what I do ideally is come up with a concept, with a venue, and a basic program, and leave enough space in the program for people to be able to step into doing their own thing.
Mm.
And that could come down to, almost a festival organizer who comes in close to the event, um, or down to people who end up and do the communal cooking, or end up doing well-being sessions or talk sessions. It's all about striking a balance, really. I wouldn't
Yeah,
like anything to be too tightly programmed, and quite a few people remarked that this year's camp out was a little bit too tightly programmed, but that was a co-creation with the Elevate community, and they brought their own particular skills, and a lot of people who came were because of the Elevate community as well. So there are advantages and disadvantages to co-creation, and it's very much still a learning experience how to get
yeah,
that.
yeah. I remember a festival that I went to in South Africa one evening in a forest, and it was a huge space area where they had lots of different things happening at the same time. There was a healing tent with massage. There was this hardcore trance dancing with no shoes on in the mud. At the end, there was a geometry class where people were painting and doing all kinds of things. Lots of different things happening all at the same time. Is that something that you'd also like to create in a festival type of atmosphere?
I suppose I would still call it a gathering rather than a festival. Festival has nuances of that audience performer divide that I was talking about,
Yeah,
where a gathering feels more like let's gather together and create as a community. So yeah, we certainly have examples. On the last day of the previous camp out, we had a complete open space day where we had a blackboard, a blank blackboard with time slots down the left and venues across the top, and just blank spaces, and people could create their own sessions. And we had
oh,
about 25 of them, I think. And that for me was the highlight of the whole event, because by the last day, people were feeling confident enough to step up and create their own sessions. And that for me is the greatest thrill, to see, to step back, provide the platform, but to step back and watch the sparks ignite and just see.
yes, I see that in you. You like to watch the sparks ignite. Um, what kind of sessions did they do at this gathering? What kind of
Oh,
things?
yeah, there's one on a new card system that someone had created that could predict things for and give you guidance on decision making and projects. There was a tantra session that Leora Lightwoman did, which was my first experience of tantra and really quite significant.
Wow.
And various sessions on all aspects of self-help through to well-being and way beyond that. So the previous one example of a previous camp out, we had someone talking about how to make a gypsy caravan for 300 quid,
Oh, wow,
something
that's
specific.
great. I love
I
that.
just love the sort of rampant creativity that can come out of giving people an open space.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Pete, what's the dream? What's the dream?
Well, I've been making notes actually. I shouldn't refer too much to the notes, but my vision is that people are able to have a sense of purpose, a sense of awareness, certainly a sense of self, and to work towards systemic change, really. There's a lot that needs changing. And one of the things I've been doing through Campfire is to try and help map out a path, which is always work in progress. But if you look at it in 4 sections of I, we, regional, and world, that's how we laid out the Trailblazers website, which is just one of the offshoots and projects of Campfire, trailblazersmovement.org. Where under Y you might have, under I you might have health, nature connection, awareness, sharpening tools, finding ourselves, how to be ethical and resourceful, self-sufficient and heart-centered. Just some examples.
Yeah.
Under we, you're listening to each other. I think that listening experience, deep listening, is so important. Imagining, the unique gift that we have as humans to imagine how the world will be. The commons, the notion of the commons and working for the common good. Local communities, independent media, looking at our rights, particularly in a legal sense as well, and how that all fits together or doesn't. And then notions of kindness as well as the legacy that we can leave. So that's just the we part. And then when you get on to looking at the regional aspects, it's time to stand up. Some people feel that they should be an alternative to the political parties that we've got around the world, and that the politics of the world just doesn't work anymore. And I'm a great believer in moving on from political parties into something that's much more based around common sense and consensus, and building consensus rather than bickering from 2 sides of the house like you have in a classic example in British politics. And then, mutual support mechanisms, how we can join the dots between those doing the good work, and the freedom to roam, countryside restrictions and petty fiefdoms and people just buying up great swathes of the country.
Yeah.
And then when you look on the global scale, you've got elements of universal commonality, the big shift that we all need to make, online communities and how they can function, money and how that might operate in the future. But most of all, finding common ground, has to be the way forward. We've been having some really interesting conversations around peace and the meaning of the word, which has been alienating for some people who are in it, as they say. They're so locked in the conflict, or they know people who are being bombed on a daily basis. How can peace even register for them? And I'm listening to them, I'm finding it hard. And I'm thinking of people like Cilla Elworthy, the wonderful peace campaigner who we had at the first campfire as keynote speaker. Her whole life's been about peace. I'm thinking, what would Cilla think, when someone's turning around and saying peace is offensive, the word peace is offensive. And I can see where they're coming from. For them, it's about justice and liberation. Peace for them means a return to the status quo, which means they're in a state of, it's just, an impossible situation. It's apartheid or whatever it is. It's suppression. It's highly oppressive in every way. So I can see why they wouldn't want peace, because it means a lifelong activism for some of those people is suddenly muted. Peace for them means a return to the status quo. So more than ever, I think we have to see things through different lenses and from different sides, and understand how certain words that we see as totally positive can still be triggering to those who are embroiled in the conflicts that are going on. But surely the only hope is to move on from retribution. And the word justice for me is very loaded, because justice can have elements of justification or retaliation. Justice does have many positive aspects as well, but it can also be loaded in terms of revenge or justification for retaliatory acts. So, peace is a big discussion at the moment.
It is, and it's very personal for each one of us, how we live our lives as well. Our experience shape what we feel about peace. You know, we've never lived in a war zone, and those who have see it in a completely different way. So I do understand that.
Mm.
Simplify for you and for yourself. What does peace mean to you, Pete, in your life now?
In my life, it's keeping a sense of balance. It's peace of mind. It's being able to be concentrating on whatever is in front of me at the moment and getting joy or peace of mind from it, but also being aware of the conflicts and the dichotomies that are going on and the struggles. So peace really is a state of mind that can arise from a sense of going inwards and a calmness that I can find through meditation or through a daily practice or just through listening and being aware. Awareness really is a route to peace, but also, you can be aware of lots of things which are negative as well. So it's being able to find that equilibrium in amongst the chaos.
Yeah. Two questions I've got for you, Pete. What makes you sad?
Certainly, some of the dehumanizing aspects of the world as I see it around me, the way that machines are taking over and stripping humanity out of situations where the human is sidelined completely, which can be very alienating. People who aren't acting out of integrity but have other motives for their actions, greed, and then warfare and territorial struggles and a ridiculous sense of what politics is. Those are the things that make me sad.
What make you happy, Pete?
Well, it'd be easy to say the flip side of all those things. For me, it's you can't beat a good conversation. And I think the joy that the creative act of a conversation can have is a newfound joy for me. I really enjoy the rhythm of good conversation. If you've got a table with, well, you remember in Paros when the beacon idea was formed, that was a great example of
Oh, it's wonderful. Really
how
wonderful.
many 7 or 8 people sitting around having a potluck supper, which we'd all contributed to, but everyone was heard, everyone felt listened to, everyone had an opportunity to talk. I was just sitting there thinking, I'm really loving the rhythm of this conversation because everyone's present and everyone is happy to hear other people talk. They don't want to hog the conversation. And we came out of it feeling really nourished, not just in terms of the potluck supper, but the depth and level of conversation that was going on there.
It was magical. It was a magical moment, just a snapshot in time, which I hope that we can have many more of in the future. And talking about the future, what's your personal vision of the future, Pete?
Well, that's a big question. I think for each of us to keep doing what we're doing and to really see what unfolds in terms of our own projects, our own inspiration, the way we communicate with others, a sense of awareness, a growing sense of awareness. We're in the middle of great changes at the moment, and I think things are moving very rapidly with technology and many other aspects, and also to be aware of how easy it is. We saw during lockdowns, how certain tendencies can come in towards fascism or towards biosecurities take control. So we have to be hyper aware of those things and to make other people aware.
Yeah.
Without living our lives in fear. But I think, again, there's a balance to be struck, to be aware of what could happen to prevent the worst from happening.
Yeah, it's difficult to stay sometimes positive in these very changing times. Pete, I never asked you about your mum. What was your mum like?
Pauline was, she died when I was 15, so my memories are slightly hazy. And I had to grow up very quickly. And I had a younger sister, 6 years younger, still have, who I think depended on me because my dad went very absent after the death, and he tried to take his own life actually 6 months later. So I suddenly had come out of this quite blissful childhood. I never heard my parents arguing. My mum was effectively a housewife, but she was a very busy housewife. And my dad was doing his music work, and in the summer he might take a part-time job as the tour guide at Warwick Castle or something else on a local level. But it was always very harmonious. I remember walking into the kitchen on one occasion and didn't quite catch them snogging, but they had their hands interlocked like this, and it was just a lovely thing to walk in on.
Yeah, it's
Um,
beautiful.
and my
Beautiful.
dad was interesting mix as well, because he was quite liberal in that he was a musician and had some quite progressive views, but he was also a conservative. So
Oh,
as an 8-year-old, I was being given orange stickers to put on my bicycle for the local Tory candidate, which I didn't question at the time, but we certainly had a few vigorous discussions about in later teens, but it
yes.
was also quite puritanical. So I remember we had a black and white telly, and if one of these racy BBC Two films came on late at night after the so-called Watershed, and it had scenes of, slightly sexual scenes, he would sit in front of me and literally block my view. He wouldn't explain why. He would just literally sit there and stop me seeing the screen.
Oh, bless him. Yes, it's very,
Yeah,
very typical conservative England, isn't it?
it was a very stiff upper lip thing. And the
Don't show
same,
your
yeah,
emotions.
after my mum died, we weren't allowed, well, even before she died, when she was in hospital for the last month of her life, he wouldn't let us go and visit her. Wouldn't let us go to the funeral. So I never had the chance to properly grieve. It was only really about 5 years ago when some friends in Frome, when I lived there, invited me to a death cafe, which was my first experience of a death cafe. But I properly grieved for my mum.
A
And
death cafe. I've never heard about that. What,
check them out. They're really great. And we had
what,
to,
what?
there were about six of us there, I think 6 or 7. We had to each bring some memorabilia and a song related to a person we wanted to remember. So it was obvious for me to choose my mum. So I picked Frank Sinatra's Fly Me to the Moon, which was, she loved Frank Sinatra. So it wasn't a mournful song, it was the opposite, really. But it was very emblematic of the time. We were all thinking of moon landings and things. It was all very expansive rather than contractive.
Yeah.
And just an opportunity to put a few of her belongings there and talk about her and remember her. And I could feel some tears welling up, and it was exactly the same for everyone who spoke managed to cry. So we provided an environment which was safe enough for people to feel they could cry, which was very cathartic and very special.
Wow, very, very, very touching. I mean, I think so many people out there know somebody they've lost, or somebody they've personally lost. Sorry, I'm completely losing my sense here. Edit that out, okay? So many people out there have lost somebody. So a death cafe actually sounds quite a good gathering to have also on Paros. I think that would really open up people's hearts and minds to come to something and experience something like that. Do you think that might happen on Paros, that we could do
Yeah,
that
I think we could do one easily. I'll revisit, because I did write up about it, and I can't remember if I transferred that to the Mighty Network or whether it's on the old Campfire site. But if it's on the old site, I'll copy it and repost it, because I wrote it just after the experience, so it was quite fresh. And I also did a playlist, I think, of the tracks that people selected. So it was great, and thanks to my friend Joanna, for inviting me to it, because it was a significant event in my life.
Of course it was. It's interesting how you chose Fly Me to the Moon, because when my sister passed at the young age of 32, I didn't want to, I was supposed to stay with her. She was dying, and I didn't want to remember her like that. So it's a long story, but I didn't want to be there. And I've never really come to terms with her, like, dying. Even the thought of it makes me very emotional.
Mm.
So yeah, I've never come to terms with it, but I would love to go to a death cafe.
Yeah, I think it sounds like it would be really good for you to take a memory of her to that. Well, let's organise one. That would be a nice thing to do for New Year.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important to have a circle of trust because, when you're bringing, strangers into something like that, it's really, you need to trust people, that you don't want, I don't know, how do we build this trust in a circle like something that's so emotional? How
It's
do
a
we build
good question,
trust?
and it's something that's cropped up a lot in conversation recently. And the way modern society is geared with all the insurance and the AI and everything else, it's so geared to mistrust, isn't it? And it's all
Yeah.
about fear, really. So to return to that situation where you're able to trust fellow humans is the ultimate sort of humanization, rehumanizing of our environment, which is so important to do.
And how do we do that, Pete?
I think just by being trusting ourselves, really. And that's the only way it will work. And that can spread like a virus if you trust people. I mean, I love the idea of honesty boxes and being able to leave doors open and not live in fear.
Well, we have that here, don't we? We have that on
Yeah,
Paros. We don't
we
have to
do.
lock our doors, and
Yeah,
we can sleep easy at night knowing that. So it's really, we're very, very fortunate knowing living in an environment like that. Yeah.
yes. And the same for the farm here in Wales as well.
What's it like there where you are? Is it nice?
It's lovely. It's quite a wild farm. I mean, it's a working farm with sheep and horses, and Ruth is doing lots of retreats and courses here. So it's not polished in any way. It's got lots of mud and lots of stinging nettles,
Great.
and
That's the way a farm should be.
yeah,
That's
and lots
lovely.
of rain. But it's got amazing views. I mean, like my place in Paros, it's up on a hill, but the views
Oh,
here
really?
across the Brecon Beacons and the Black Mountains. So you look out to the northwest and see some amazing sunsets. There's one just brewing at the moment, actually.
Tell
Okay,
us, what was your experience on acid when you were, how old were you?
I was 17.
Tell us.
So it happened the same month, I think, as I lost my virginity. So my world was turned upside down, actually,
Yes.
during the dark winter nights of 17. Acid was, well, let's put it this way, I only felt a need to do it once. Um,
Okay.
it was quite a strong reaction, and it was a sort of heaven and hell experience, but a very mind expanding one in so many ways. And being able to mix your senses and to hear smells and feel sounds and
That's a good
you
one.
know, mix and match your senses. And a sense that it was playing with counterculture, which was something that since the age of 12 and listening to progressive rock albums, I always thought this is, even at the time, I thought it's quite unusual for a 12-year-old to be listening to all four sides of Miles Davis Bitches Brew, or Frank Zappa's Hot Rats. But they were really formative days for me. And we had a newsstand in Leamington that would sell Oz and International Times, Friends, Little Red School Book, Rolling Stone when it was still an underground magazine. And yeah, there was a lot of wisdom disseminated through those publications and a real sense of being into something, that you discovered secretly.
Yeah.
That none of my school friends would be into at all.
So very unusual. It would be nice to see a picture of you at the age of that age, discovering all of that.
Well, I had short back and sides. It was almost comedy, actually, because I remember going, my first trip to London, we stayed at Holland Park Youth Hostel, and we'd passed Piccadilly Circus, and I bought a Frank Zappa poster, and we were sharing our dormitory with a few traveling hippies, a couple of Americans, and I got my Zappa poster out to show to my friend, and this American hippie said, "Wow, Frank Zappa, man, are you into Zappa?" And I said, "Yeah, yes, he's my favorite." He said, "How old are you?" I said, 12. He said, "Man, I've been traveling across Europe for 6 months, and you're the first Zappa head I've found, and you're 12 years old with short back and sides."
Brilliant.
And
Oh,
my
brilliant.
appearance belied what was in my head.
Oh, wonderful. What's just wanted to end with what's your perfect gathering? What does that look like to you? Your perfect gathering?
Oof. Um, I suppose any perfect gathering has to have a sense of imperfection as well, because the random things are what often makes, in retrospect, you look back and think that was perfect, but it's often the happy accidents. So to even craft something that you call perfect would have to involve some random elements that could be imperfect, if that makes sense. But it would be perhaps similar to what we're doing with Camp Out now on a permaculture farm over a few days. Some people who I'd know, others who I wouldn't, but lots of people who entered it with the right spirit of adventure and playfulness and learning and a real sense of coming together. There's a movement going on. You know, a lot of us aren't aware that there's a movement going on, but yeah, there's a big shift going on, and it's finding those people you can join the dots with and those projects you can join together and get that sense of how big this movement is and what's going on.
If you're somebody that doesn't like to leave your home, because many people, they're quite scared to go to gatherings. They feel, they don't have enough confidence or whatever it is, anxious. How do we entice those types of people to come?
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? I mean, there's one woman who hitchhiked down from Sheffield on her own, getting a variety of lifts. There's another friend of mine who was in the Peak District, not far from where Ruth lived, who didn't come because she was scared or fearful that no one would talk to her, or it would be the wrong sort of people. So it's very easy to play up the negatives. I think come with an open mind and an open heart. And so many people just talked afterwards about running into people who would just be incredibly friendly or interested. But at the same time, you can go off and be on your own in nature if you want to. So it's not like a big festival where you're crowded into an area where you're feeling threatened. You know, there's lots of different places you can go to. And as it stands at the moment, I think it's well, it's like going on a camping weekend with friends, really, but a lot of those friends you haven't met yet.
No, that's nice. That's a nice way of putting it. How do we all stay positive in these very changing times? How do we stay positive?
Just to remember that every single conversation can make a difference, and you can never tell what sort of impact anything you will say to anyone else or they'll say to you will have. And I like the analogy of ripples, a stone in the water in a pond, watching the ripples spread out. It's incredible to see how some ideas can take hold and what some people might consider menial conversations can have quite an impact on a lot of things. So never underestimate the power of a simple conversation.
Yeah, an idea that births from a seed into a beautiful tree, right? I lit a candle actually for this wonderful interview, my little lamp. I don't know if you can see that. It's got some holes in it. And this lamp really represents for the light to come in to the earth and illuminates all of our souls, because ultimately we are much more than a physical being here on earth, experiencing many, many different things. And if you were if I were to pass this lamp on to you, what would you like to say while holding it?
I think something similar to you, that we need to let the light in. We need to be conscious of where the light is, and particularly in relation to seasonal changes and learning from nature, and not seeing as something to be plundered or something to be kept at arm's length. But we are all one, we're all part of this together. So to be conscious of that.
Absolutely. And to step out of our judgments about each and every one and just understand we are such colorful, multifaceted beings living this wondrous experience on it. Thank you so much, Pete. That was wonderful.
Thank you very much, Nicole.
Is there anything else you would like to leave your beautiful audience with?
Well, just to wish everyone a warm, dark season, and to light up whatever is around them, and to have hope and Love is the Answer. We did a track called Love is the Answer with Moses singing Campfire Circle Singers. My dad always used to say, in the end, it just comes down to love. So for him, love was the answer. And that was perhaps his best teaching to me. And I continue to carry that flame, carry that torch.
Yeah, it'd be lovely to see an image of your father, sending him lots of love wherever he is. And yeah, just for us all to stay in our hearts and stay on the positive timeline, whatever that is for you.
Yes, I will put one up as we speak. There'll be one appearing on my interview.
Love.
Going out to Ray Lawrence and his music, as he used to call it.
Ray Lawrence and his music. Lots of blessings. One day, when you leave this world, this beautiful earth, what message would you like to leave behind?
I think it has to come back to love. Yeah, I've talked about Love is the Answer before. We've done a track called Love is the Answer. And whatever the conflicts are, whatever the resolutions, whatever the touch points, to keep coming back to love and to keep an open heart, difficult as it may be in certain situations. That has to be the answer.
God bless you, Pete. Thank you so much for this lovely interview. I hope the viewers have enjoyed it as much as I have, asking you lots of interesting questions. Thank you so much, Pete. And have a happy, happy Christmas. And for everyone watching, have a wonderful Christmas and a really, really joyous New Year.
Thank you.
Thank you.